Hi everyone, I'm Ioana. I'm here to present our papers with the title Polarizing Socio-Technical Imaginaries, a multi-criteria mapping analysis of online taxis in Indonesia. Studying future articulation is focused on linking the past with the futures, enabling or restricting actions in space, and normalizing ways of thinking about many possible futures. Therefore, imaginaries of futures articulations are most powerful when they become part of collective repertoire of ideas and statements shared by large stakeholders um, groups. And imaginaries are never neutral constructs, but are framed in a particular way. This leads to dynamics of inclusion and exclusion of certain actors and aspects as they become perceived as more or less important or meaningful part of the futures. So our papers embrace a more inclusive approach to the assessment of urban mobility futures. We aim to open up diversity of perspective in imagining the futures by bringing together representative of wider than usual range of constituency in the future articulations of urban mobility in Indonesia. We use the case of Indonesian urban mobility as a case that represents somewhat what we call as a bounded imaginary, where mostly the transport governance are very centered visions of urban development, which characterized by car-based transport system and lack of intersectoral coordinations. This research attempt to include perspective from other sectors as well as other communities in envisioning the future of mobilities. In doing so, this paper explored imaginary of future of digital technology in urban mobility, particularly on digital ride sharing enabled by smartphone apps, which in Indonesia are commonly known as the online taxis. Ever since their aggressive introductions several years ago, digital ride-sharing service has led to controversies and disruptions in many cities around the world. Online taxi service has grown in popularity since 2015. Since then, a diverse set of tensions among various car-based and motorcycle-based transport system and actors in mobility system of Jakarta and other cities has become apparent. Recently, policymakers were criticized for mainly being responsive to these anxieties rather than being proactive and for preferring short-term solutions rather than systematically anticipating the future positions of online taxi in the context of urban, urban mobility. Our research questions was, what are the dynamics in constructing imaginaries of the future of online taxis in Indonesia? In order to address these questions, we undertook multi-criteria mapping developed by Andy Stirling and colleagues, which is MCM or multi-criteria mapping as a multi-stakeholder engagement tools that help to broaden and open up societal debates about political choice through a systematic articulations of all relevant perspectives, for instance, new technology, and also illuminating the range of uncertainty within and ambiguity between each of these perspectives. And last one, documenting qualitative argument and reflections concerning the rational and underlying belief associated with this perspective and uncertainty. And this is our research framework, which is divided into three different phases. The first phase is a future storylines building. Well, we are conducting a very systemic web analysis in order to construct the initial future storylines of online taxi and urban mobility in Indonesia. And then we also conduct document analysis and we come up with these initial storylines. The idea for this initial storyline is as an entry point for discussions. So moving on to the next phase, which is the future storyline appraisals. Here we conduct a one-on-one MCM interview and we bring these initial storylines to all of our interviewees, and we come up with this storyline as the entry point. The interview is, of course, very free to either neglect it or agree with our initial storylines, and that we also invite them to add any additional future storylines that they have in mind. And the last phase is future storyline dialogue. So idea is in the last phase is we invite all of the interviewees into one group discussions where we are discussing the preliminary result of the interviews and our research. And then we asked our interview all of the participants in this group to give some comments and feedback towards our initial storylines and also any additional storylines, as well as any criteria that comes up during the MCM interviews. So from this framework, our result is actually divided into three different dynamics. The first one is the dynamic and diversity of our future storylines. Here are our initial future storylines, where we divided into three different storylines. The first one is transformation. So all the time horizon that we use for all of this research is 10 years ahead of time. So around 2030s, we invited our interviewee to imagine what will be the future of online taxi and also urban mobility in Indonesia. These storylines of transformations imagine that the future of online taxi will become the dominant players. Online taxi seen as very embedded services, very well with people daily activities, and the positions of the government here is only as enabler of this technology without any strong interventions in governing this innovations. So we found it something like a market-based mechanism. And the optimization, second scenario or future storyline is the optimization storylines, where the imagination is that in 10 years, online taxi only become as feeders for last mile, first mile, and the government act as the manager in governing this online taxi. And the last future storyline is decentralization, where this storylines imagines a more local players emerge in 10 years, came from a local and regional area in Indonesia, where the local government has more active players in these storylines. Also, quite interestingly, we also have four additional storylines from our interviewees. The first one is the imagination about the 5G technology leapfrogging and how will it really affect the mobility of online taxi in Indonesia. Second one is the autonomous vehicle imaginaries, where it somehow imagine how autonomous vehicle will replace the functions of personal or human drivers. And the third one is Jakarta pilot, which imagines how this current and centralized and unequal development between capital city in Jakarta is actually very different development compared to other regional. So these storylines imagine Jakarta will become somehow the leader of mobility development in Indonesia. And the last one is substitutions, how the storylines actually trying to say online taxi will be replaced by conventional taxis. So these are the additional storylines that we found. We also asked each of the interviewee to give their appraisal to what extent they feel optimistic and pessimistic toward all of this scenario. And unfortunately, for the four additional scenario, we only can ask the appraisals from the interviewee that proposed this idea, and we cannot have any comparison with different interviewee because we conducted the interview from one-on-one interviews. However, the collective appraisal can be seen from these three initial storyline, which is decentralization, optimizations, and transformations. And we can see here that the most optimistic future storyline shared by the groups are in scenario of optimization, where the government become the managers and this online taxi only fit as first mile and last miles. However, if we look at the length of the bar, we can see it's quite long. It means that there's still a lot of uncertainties in somehow from our interviewees in governing and also in constructing the future imaginaries of these optimizations storylines. And the second dynamic is on dynamic and diversity of articulating the futures. So the MCM method also allow us to open up criteria for each interview to evaluate each of the future storylines. And quite interestingly, we found 19 criteria that we categorize into 4 categories, which is the economic category, government regulations category, social category, and technology. Somehow, we found that doing the MCM exercise helps us to open up all of this category and bring this very diverse category into stakeholders of online taxi. And the third dynamics is on the dynamic of social relations. Here, we found that how the study case shows how the non-technological aspect are more prominent than technical aspect in articulated futures. If we look at from the 19th criteria that come up as our result of our research results, only 4 of these 19 criteria are related to technological aspect of mobility. So which means we found that there are a lot more non-technological aspects that become materials for people to evaluate the features of online taxi. The second dynamic is the dynamic of imaginary, also can be traced in terms of the time horizons. So based on the result, we found that actors are actually divided by their temporal capacity to imagine the futures. And also the last one, actors, we found that actors that we interviews do not a priori pose ready-made imaginaries, but these imaginaries actually emerge or also fade in a social network through dialogue, interactions, and after considering the context and situation of different actors group. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward for additional questions or comments or any clarifications toward our result, and looking forward for the fruitful discussions.